In the world today, we've created a series of digital conversations with Broadway professionals where we talk about the craft and the business of Broadway and how we can pass along this legacy to the next generation of musical theater artists. The SDSU Studio Series is organized by the SDSU MFA Musical Theatre Program. This program is one of only a handful of graduate degrees offered in the United States that offer the terminal degree in musical theater, and our graduates are acting, directing, choreographing, music directing, writing, and teaching in university positions worldwide. Our goal is to bring the professional world and the academic world together so that students of musical theater are prepared for today's job market. My name is Robert Meff. I worked as a professional conductor, music director, and orchestrator on Broadway for 22 years before moving to San Diego to become head of the MFA Musical Theatre Program. My goal is that every person who wants to be a musical theater artist is able to access what is going on in the professional world, which led me to creating this series and leads me to my guest, Susan H. Schulman. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here, Rob.
So before we begin, I want to give some expectations of today's discussion. If you have questions, feel free to use the chat function on the right side of your screen. After my questions are completed, I will ask questions from your submissions to the panelists. And if you're from a university musical theater program, type the name of your school in the chat function. I would love to see who's represented. So let us begin. Susan H. Schulman is a Tony-nominated Broadway director for the Circle in the Square revival of Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street. Also on Broadway, she directed Secret Garden, The Sound of Music, and Little Women. Along with her incredible career as a professional director, she's also the head of the MFA program at Penn State University that specializes in directing musicals. Thank you for being here today.
My pleasure.
So we have a series of questions for you, Susan. I'm so glad that you're here. And thank you all for coming here. And we're going to start way when you grew up. So you grew up in New York City, Brooklyn, to be exact.
I did. I
went to school.
I went to, I was born in Brooklyn, and I went to the High School of Performing Arts. So I took the subway every day into school, which horrified my parents.
How early was that?
Yeah, it was very early. But it was a great experience for me being in the middle of the theater district. The old Performing Arts was right on 46th Street between Broadway and 6th Avenue. So we were right in the heart of the theater district. But my theater life started way before that because my dad, who was an immigrant from Russia, Romania, depending on the year, loved theater and was a great patron of the Yiddish theater down on the Lower East Side. And so he would take me to Broadway every year on my birthday to see a Broadway show, and then we go to Macy's and buy the gift. So I think I started seeing Broadway shows from the time I was 7 years old. And, you know, once that happens, there's no going back. So I never knew what it was exactly I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to do that. So whatever got me to do that, which was a Broadway musical, I was going to do.
What were some of the first shows you saw?
Oh, West Side Story, The Music Man. I think I might have seen them on the same day. Those were, yeah, absolutely. And then maybe had lunch at the Automat. Do you guys remember the Automat? Do you know what that was? Yeah, that was where you put a nickel in a little slot and you got out a piece of pie or soup. But I would also, my friends and I would make up little musicals and do them on the fire escapes in Brooklyn, using the fire escapes. Once I saw West Side Story and the fire escape set, I thought, well, I have that set at home. That set exists for me. And so we would do little bits of musicals on the fire escape. When I went to performing arts, and I'm so fortunate to have grown up in New York, to have had a specialized high school that was free because we didn't have any money at all. We were, you know, not poor, but certainly wasn't money to send me to any sort of private school. I came in contact for the first time in my life with a woman who was a theater director at the High School of Performing Arts. I never knew that was even a profession called directing. I knew actors, I knew dancers, I knew choreographers, excuse me. And her name was Vinette Carroll. And she was my acting teacher. And she was fantastic. And she started me thinking that maybe that's what I wanted to do. Maybe directing was what I wanted to do. But I didn't know. So I tried everything. When I left performing arts, I decided I would go to university and try everything. Sort of that. But growing up in New York and going to public schools in New York, at that time, we would go to a museum, botanical gardens, the planetarium. We'd go to Lincoln Center to see the Royal Shakespeare Company. We'd see Leonard Bernstein conducting.
Wow.
So I never think of myself as having been without money or without cultural resources, because I was born in New York City and all this was free to me as a public school child at the time. So I, at one point, could have been a guide in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. We had been there so often.
All right. Well, how does your appreciation of art work into your directing?
I am a very visual director. I have no doubt that it comes from that. My sense of viewpoint, of focus, of beauty, if you will, is all always thought of within that frame. And I know so much of it has come from my exposure to art at a very early age. Color, movement. You know.
Do you have favorite artists from the Met, or that you like?
Also from the Museum of Modern Art as well. Yes, I was a big fan of the Impressionists, all of them. Again, my mother was, she was not a professional artist, but she did a lot of artwork, and she was a fauvist. We used to say about my mom that she never met a color she didn't like. So our apartment was sort of like that. We had a red kitchen and a turquoise bedroom, and but I do find that artists have, for instance, when I did Violet, I was very impacted by Hopper, and so was Derek McLean, the set designer. And you can, if you look at the video of that, you can almost see Hopper paintings from moment to moment. But I love all the Impressionists for various different reasons.
Sure. So you talked about college for a moment. So you went to Hofstra for your undergrad degree, and you went to Yale for playwriting. How was playwriting informing your work as a director, especially of new shows?
Well, to be very honest with you, the reason I applied to Yale as a playwright was because I needed a fellowship, and I knew that's where the money was. It wasn't in directing, and they were accepting very few women in the directing program at that time, and I knew that.
Right.
I had homework,
and that was just because of sexism? Yeah,
just because, exactly. I mean, someone even said to me, well, what happens if you meet someone in school and get married? I went, I can't even answer that question. But anyway, so I applied in playwriting because I had written, interestingly, at Performing Arts, they had a pilot program in playwriting. So I had started writing plays very early. And then when I got to Hofstra, I was lucky enough to actually have some of my plays produced at Hofstra, some of my short one acts. So the faculty, we had 3 members of the faculty at Hofstra at that time who had graduated from the drama school at Yale. So on their advice, they suggested that I apply in playwriting. And they were right, because I got admitted and I got a fellowship. And once I was at Yale, I was able to, it was a conservatory program, I was able to do a lot of other things. I was able to act and direct, and though they yelled at me a lot for not just writing plays. So Robert Brustein was head of the program at the time, and he was not having my being cast in shows when I should be writing. So.
Oh, interesting. Did you have any mentors that you especially connected with at Yale?
Well, it was a very fluid faculty at the time. The drama school was going under a lot of changes. And I will say that I got more from my fellow students. I went to school with Aubrey Brown and Irene Lewis and just, incredible directors and actors. And so I was very much inspired by them. Nico Sakaropoulos was my directing teacher. And I will say that every bit of craft that is part of my directing gestalt comes from him. Yes, he was very much craft based as a teacher, and we did so many exercises in focus and handling props and all the technical aspects of directing, and I owe him a great debt for that, because it was poo-pooed after I left Yale and wasn't being taught anywhere anymore. It was all, a lot of directing was based on, it's important in its own right, in just collaborating and feeling and finding things with the other people, not in the preparation, in the actual craft of it.
Well, it's so interesting. Something I've admired about your work throughout your whole career is your incredible ability to provide transition from scene to scene to scene to scene. Your work on Violet is exceptional. And was that something that was partially inspired by Nico, or
it was all about keeping the story going, storytelling, and also see if you don't know how to transition from scene to scene, if you don't understand the craft of that, you can't continue the story going. You can say, I want to continue the story going, but how do you do it? One of the things I always say at Penn State is I never want lack of craft to get in the way of vision or ideas. So if you don't know how to do it, it doesn't matter how great your idea is, right? How many good ideas have we seen fail on stage because of whatever reason they've not known how to theatricalize it? And I've always, even as a theater goer, as a young person, I hated blackouts. I just didn't like the blackout. I would just, don't do that. I know you're moving the set. You're not fooling anybody, So rather than blacking out, taking me out of the story, changing the set, and then bringing back on or whatever it is you're doing, why don't you use the transition to continue the story in some way? And I have found that it's actually not all that difficult when you think to do it. I think sometimes directors and designers just don't think to do it.
Well, the blackout is an easy way out.
Yeah, either that or the Act One curtain, whatever, the old-fashioned Act One curtain coming in so you can change the set. I don't want the audience to ever feel that I'm doing something that they're not a part of. I want the audience to be a part of my getting to the next moment.
I love that. I love that. That's great. So in the 1980s, you directed at the Pittsburgh Civic Light Opera for a lot of the decade. And it's actually where we met, doing a production of 1776 in 1987.
That was a good production.
It was of course, I was, an apprentice with the music director at the time, and people like Mark Jacoby were there, and it was the late Patrick Quinn, right? And it was the most extraordinary cast I'd ever seen assembled in one rehearsal hall. But it didn't get to me until my professional career that I really understood how extraordinary that room was. And your casting of that was just extraordinary. It really was.
Casting directors in New York accused me of taking every leading man available out of the market in that show. It was great. It was great. I will tell you, I was very young, and or else why would I direct 5 shows in one summer season? I directed them back to back. You have to be young and a little dumb to say yes to that. Because there were times when people would ask me a question. I go, no, you have to name the show first and then ask the question, because I'm doing 5 shows. But I will tell you, what I learned in working at Pittsburgh Civic Light Opera was not to waste time, to know how to do my homework, and to treat the stage crew like gold, because if they are not on your side, it was, it is interesting to me that when actors and directors have to work quickly, sometimes you get a purely visceral solution to a problem. You skip the kind of going through all the little why you can't, why I can, why I can't, you go straight to the solution. And sometimes those are just magical. There are moments in a production of West Side Story when I think about, which we did in what, I don't know, 6 days, that I don't know that I could have done better if I had 5 weeks, because of the collaboration, the kind of instantaneous collaboration with the actors at that moment. But I will say something else. I had never worked with a union crew before, so I was really thrown into the hot seat. I remember my first show, I jumped up on stage in tech to move a piece of scenery, and of course, 5 guys came up and said, no, tell us what you want, we'll do it. I went, okay. But they taught me so much about teching a show. It was unbelievable. When I did my first Broadway show, they asked me how many weeks of tech I wanted, and I sort of blinked and went, weeks? You mean I get weeks to tech a show? In Pittsburgh, we teched a show in 5 hours, you know. Good luck opening night, you know. Some actors saw scenery for the first time opening night. But the other thing that Local 3 in Pittsburgh, who are dear to my heart because of everything that they taught me, was that when I was going to do my first Broadway show, because I was actually at Pittsburgh when I found out about Sweeney moving to Broadway.
Oh, wonderful.
I was actually directing a production of Grease with Carolee Carmello in the lead. How long ago it was. And when I got word that Sweeney was moving to Broadway, and I told the crew, and the crew was very excited for me, and the head carpenter, whose name was Bernie, I still remember, said to me, you listen to me, Susan, when you go to Broadway, the first thing you do is you walk into the office of the head carpenter at Local 1, and you tell him that Local 3 trained you.
Oh.
I said, okay, Bernie. And when I got to Circle in the Square, I asked where the head carpenter's office was. They showed me. I walked in. I said, how do you do? I'm Susan Schulman. I want you to know that Local 3 trained me. And he just howled. He couldn't stop laughing. And he said, did they tell you to tell me that? I said, they did. Well, I will tell you, those guys were incredible. They couldn't do enough for us. And bringing them into the collaborative process was a major gift that Local 3 gave me to understand, and it has stayed with me all these years. It's a very, very positive thing to always remember. It's easy to forget because they're just there all the time. But anyway, I also got, because I directed so many musicals, I got enormous frames of references over the years. I think I directed 30 musicals at Pittsburgh.
Wow.
If I'm clear about that. Yeah, 5 years, yeah, about 30. So I could reference any musical, a moment, which is very helpful when you're working, to say, hey, that moment in Music Man, remember why does that number work? Especially if you're doing working on a new show. Right. You can say, that song works because this, and this. What if our song did that? So I have this incredible reservoir because I've actually directed so many of those shows. And it's a special thing that I never want to do it again. I don't ever want to work that fast or do that many shows that quickly, but I am so grateful that I had that experience.
Yeah, well, as a native of Pittsburgh, I'm very proud of my hometown and
Mm-hmm.
proud of the Pittsburgh Civic Light Opera. And I think that this shows well to the people out there listening, you know, about education is more, I think a lot of what you've said so far is education is the classroom plus. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You
Yeah.
know, whether it's Pittsburgh Civic Light Opera or the Metropolitan Museum, I think that it's all part of who makes you.
It is. It is. Mm-hmm.
So you talked a little about Sweeney Todd. I would love for you to talk a little bit about your collaboration with Stephen Sondheim on Sweeney Todd and with your revival of Merrily.
I had tried to think at this, get the years right in my head. The first time I think I met Stephen Sondheim was I had done a production of Company at Equity Library Theater.
Mm.
And that was Equity Library Theater, for those of you listening who don't know, was a premier showcase theater in New York for many, many years. And he came to see the production with James Lapine. I remember that. And I didn't know either one of them. Mm. And they were lovely after the show. And I remember Stephen saying, I'd like to meet the cast. Do you think they'd mind? And I went, do I think they'd mind? I think they'll be thrilled. And he, you know, he was so decorous. He said, well, I don't want to disturb. I said, no, it's fine. They will want to meet you. And the other fun fact about this is to get to the dressing rooms. You know, we were at the Church of the Heavenly Rest at that time.
Right.
They were performing there. To get to the dressing rooms, you had to go through the men's room. So I had to lead Stephen Sondheim through the men's room to get to the actors to introduce him to them. Anyway, he was lovely and James was lovely. And that was the first time that I met him. And then I have to sort of scoot back many, many years, because when I first got out of university, I directed a play with friends of mine. We just got together and did a play called Look, I've Come Through. Look, We've Come Through. Look, We've Come Through. And the play was by Hugh Wheeler. Oh. And we just got together and we just decided to do a play. We chose this play because it had a lot of young people in it. And I directed it and cleaned the bathrooms and was box office manager. And we all did 100 things, right? And we rented some little space on the old 42nd Street where you could actually afford to rent a space. Right. Before it was the new 42nd Street. Right. And we put the show on and put a few little ads in the trade papers. And one day I was in the box office and this man at intermission came up to the box office and said, is the director here? I went, yes, can I help you? And he said, yes, I'd like to meet her. I'm Hugh Wheeler. I went, oh, to myself, my life is over. I said, oh, one moment. And
I'll get her.
I came around, introduced myself as the director, and he said, this is so wonderful. Thank you so much for doing my play. He said, this play is very meaningful to me. It's very personal. Nobody does it. Thank you. This is a lovely production. And that was, and he was, again, as charming as could be, and so, just so encouraging. Mm. And that was it. And so I met him. When it came to doing Sweeney Todd, Stephen Sondheim at that time had approval of any director who was going to do one of his shows in a major venue in the New York metropolitan area. So my name was given to his agent, who was Flora Roberts, who is gone now. And she said, who is that woman? I don't know that woman. I never heard of that woman. Well, why would she hear of me? And as it turns out, Hugh Wheeler was also her client. And he said, I know who she is.
Wow.
She directed this play. So it's a kind of connect the dots. I never would have gotten to do Sweeney Todd probably, but for the fact that I got together with some friends of mine and we did a Hugh Wheeler play several years earlier. Which is why you should never sit around and wait for somebody to give you work, right? You should always make work.
So I'm going to underline that and put that in bold type.
Please
for everybody.
underline that. Please. So I was very trepidatious about doing Sweeney. It had only been 10 years since Al Prince's amazing production, and which was so imprinted on everybody's brain. And I had to do it on a basketball court, literally. At the Church of the Heavenly Rest, they did the shows downstairs in the gym, and which had a small stage there. So after talking to a number of friends, they said, "Susan, do you want to do it? Do you want to do it?" I said, "Yeah," because when else would I ever get a chance to direct Sweeney Todd? Who's going to let me direct Sweeney Todd? Right. So I said, "Okay, I'm doing it." Okay, fine. So I knew the space we had, and I decided to use the gym and not the stage. And then I went through the script with my musical director, and I decided that I could do it with 14 people without cutting a line of dialogue or a note of music.
Okay.
And I said, okay, but I'm going to have to get Steve Sondheim-Smission to do this. So I got his phone number from Janet Walker, who was the artistic director at the time. She said, "It's okay, call Steve Ness." I went, "All right." So I was so nervous.
Of course.
And I went, okay. So I called him and I said, "So this is what I'm thinking. And I'm thinking we'll have a quartet of 5." And I said, "Quartet of 5." And he went, 3 men, 2 women. I went, okay. And I said, "And we'll have so many pieces." He went, no, that's not good. Use 3 synthesizers. I went, really? Really? He said, yeah. He said, "I wouldn't say this about any one of my other scores, but this score I think will work on 3 synths. It's better than having this way reduced," because we could only afford 5 instruments, right, or 4 instruments at the time. I said, okay, that means we're going to have to get someone really good to do that kind of programming, to get that orchestrated program. So he said that, and he said, I said, "Do you have anything else to tell me?" He goes, "No." I went, okay, thank you.
That's it?
That's it. And
wow.
And he went off to England to do the lectures. At Oxford, Cambridge, I think. Oxford.
I remember those. Yeah, they're online.
Right, they're online. Incredible lectures. So he was never there for the rehearsal period at Church of the Heavenly Rest. He came back right as we were about to do, I think, the day before our first preview. And so we were doing a run. He called me and said, "I'm back in town. When can I come?" I said, "Well, you can come tonight. We're doing a run." And he came in, and of course there's nobody there, it was just us. And he came and he goes, "Where do you want me to sit?" I went, "Well, you can sit next to me, because if you sit across the room, I'll have to watch you taking notes. And if you sit next to me, we'll both be taking notes. It'll be okay." So he said, okay. And so he had a legal pad. And yes, this is heart-stopping. At the end of the first act, I think he had taken 8 pages of notes on the legal pad.
Okay.
I couldn't speak. I couldn't talk. And I figured, and he was still writing when the lights came up. I went, "All right, okay, you have to say something, Susan." So I said, "So, boss." He said, "What?" I said, "So what do you think?" He goes, "What?" I said, "What do you think about the first act?" He went, "Oh, yeah, it's swell. It's swell." I went, "It's swell? Then what are you writing?" He said, "Oh, no, little tiny things. I get, little music notes, little nothing. No big deal." He had 2 major notes for me, and they were about cuts. He wanted to cut organ prelude, and he wanted to cut the second part of the Pirelli sequence, the shaving sequence, which had a tooth pulling sequence as well. It's 2 parts to it. And we did both of them. And he thought it was well done, but he thought it was too long and not necessary. And so we cut that. And we had reinstated the judge's Joanna, which was not in the original production.
Right.
Now, he really liked that a lot. Good. And I felt it made a huge difference in our understanding of why we want the judge to be dead. So he was very, very supportive of the production. It did very well. It got lovely reviews. It got one review in a major paper, and I won't tell you the paper and I won't tell you the critic, but it's something that stayed with me all these years because it was a prime example of the sexism that still existed as far as women directors are concerned. It was not Frank Rich. Okay, I'll say that, who gave the show a wonderful review. It was not Frank Rich. He said, basically, and I'm paraphrasing, that the show was so good, it was impossible to tell the gender of the director.
No.
Yeah, I'm paraphrasing, but that was the inference. It was clear, the clear inference of it. And
how do you respond to that?
Thinking, well, I thought he was of a certain generation, this critic. He was an older gentleman. And I'm sure he thought that was a compliment.
Right.
I gave him the benefit of the doubt in that he thought that that was, well, you know, but it stung. It really stung me because I thought, what does that have to do with anything? But be that as it may. Then when we got the word that we're going to move to Broadway, it was, of course, the single thing that had been my dream my whole life, because Broadway was my regional theater. I didn't know anything else. I didn't know any live theater at Broadway, you know, as a child growing up. So I kept thinking something's going to happen to prevent the show from happening. I would watch myself crossing the street. I was so sure I'd get hit by a car before I got to Broadway. And I remember walking into Circle in the Square for the first reading, and you know how Circle in the Square, you come on top and then you see everything. And I saw the whole cast assembled for the reading, and I could tear even now.
Of course. Oh, well, you know,
but,
the distance from the fire escapes in Brooklyn to the Circle in the Square Theater is the A train, but it's a long way.
Yes. And I will say, what good fortune that I would make my Broadway debut with a masterpiece and with a master like Stephen Sondheim being around to be supportive and being helpful and to teach me all about what this means doing a show on Broadway. And he had a lot to teach me. One of the things I remember him saying, and I'm sure Steve will be fine if I share this with you. He said, you know, on Broadway, somebody has the clout on a show. Usually it's the director should have the clout, but you don't have the clout because you've never directed a show on Broadway. I have the clout. I won't let them give it to me. I'll make them give it to you.
Wow.
And he would never, if a producer would say to him, what do you think about the curtain? Don't you think we don't need the clothesline? He would always say, I don't know, ask Susan.
Even if he had an opinion about it.
And he did, but until he shared it with me, he would not let them do that. He clearly threw the power back to me all the time. And he explained to me that he would never also disagree with me in public. Mm-hmm. In a public situation, he would never disagree with me. And I'm sure what was unsaid was he expected that in return, which is what should happen. And that he would never give an actor a note without my permission. And so he taught me all these protocols, which I didn't really kind of know. Working with somebody like that, I would think, oh my God, you can ask my permission before you give an actor a note. And he told me some terrible stories about when a writer had not done that, mm-hmm. and actors actually changed the whole focus of a show without the director knowing it. So we opened, and he was, through the entire process, he would come in and sit and be very quiet and give notes at the end to me, talk about certain things. Didn't only ever insisted about one or two things. Other than that, he'd say, but it's your choice. This is what I think, but it's your choice. Great collaborator. we opened, we did very well in the reviews. And on opening night, I was a little drunk, I have to say. I had a little bit to drink.
Hey, if you're going to get drunk, let it be the opening night of your
drunk on
Broadway.
the opening of the first Broadway show. When can you do it, right? So he was leaving the party, and I threw my arms around him. And anybody who knows Stephen Sondheim knows that it's not, it's not the most comfortable thing for him to have somebody fling their arms around him.
Sure.
And I probably was a little teary and a little thing. And I just went, "Oh, Steve, thank you. Thank you for your generosity." And he said something which I say and I repeat very often in many collaborative situations. He said to me, "Susan, please, it's easy being generous. The hard part is learning how to take." And I thought, that's true. That is so true. It's very easy to give ideas. It's very easy to, I think. It's very hard to shut up and listen to other people's ideas and thoughts when you're collaborating. And that's the hard part. And that's what I learned from him, was to shut up and listen.
Wow.
Because, he had a lot of good things to say. But it is the basis of what makes a good collaboration, I believe, to this day.
Yeah, I mean, I can't underscore, I'm just bowled over by what you've said here so far. Just his protocol. I mean, he's Stephen Sondheim, right? He's a legend. He could say and do whatever he wants, but the idea of his understanding of the collaborative process is just something that everyone should really listen to. I thank you for
and his respect for the position of the director.
Sure.
It was amazing to me. When people sometimes say to me, "Who is the easiest person you ever had to work with?" I went, "Stephen Sondheim." And they go, "What?" I went, "No, true.
Right. Well, we won't get into some of your other collaborations. But I do want to talk about
memoirs.
What's that?
I said, those are for my memoirs.
Yes, I can't wait for those. So I wanted to talk about Secret Garden for a moment. You're the director of Secret Garden, and it was historic for many reasons, including the all-female identifying makeup of the writing team, director, and many of the designers.
Both
designers.
Yeah.
And did you understand the historic nature of that, or are you just finding the best people? And almost 30 years later, how do you feel about female representation on Broadway?
It's very interesting. The project started with an idea of Heidi Ettinger, the set designer at the time. She was married to Rocco Landesman at the time, so she was known as Heidi Landesman. She came to me while I was teching Sweeney Todd, and she called me on the phone, asked me if I knew a book called Secret Garden. Of course I did, and she told me about this musical and asked if she could come talk to me. And I said, "Well, I'm teching, so you can come sit while I do light cues." And she did, and we talked about the show. And it had gone through somewhat of a developmental period prior to her coming to me. And she said that she wanted me to listen to a demo tape and let her know what I thought. And if I liked it, she'd like me to direct it. They'd like me to direct it. And it was a project for Broadway. And the Dodgers were involved, and Ju Jamson were involved at the time. And so I remember putting on the CD and the opening chord. Talk about, I was gone. They had me at the opening chord, which was so bizarre. I just couldn't stop listening to it. Talk about things that move me. Melody, the melodies were so lush and so gorgeous and so emotional. And I knew nothing about anything else. I just knew this demo tape, which I think was just Lucy Simon singing. It was very, yeah. And so I said yes. And we started working on the show because everyone sort of knew it needed some workshops and readings. It needed more development. And I was not it didn't occur to me that, oh, look at all these women. We did have Michael Lichtenfeld was the choreographer, so we had a token fellow. It didn't occur to me at the time, but that this was odd.
Right.
But as we went forward, so many people asked us about it that I realized just how unique it was for Broadway.
Right.
At that time, also, when you asked me why I hired the designers, did I hire them because they were women? No, I asked for Theone Aldridge because she was Theone Aldridge for
Right.
the costumes, Theron Musser for the lights because she was Theron Musser. These were two women who were top in their fields. And I was fortunate enough to have them say yes, to work with them. So it turned out we had a all-female design team as well. I think, well, if you listen to the crew at the St. James, that's the only people they ever want to work with again. They were saying, oh my gosh, they said, it's so much different. I said, why is it different? They went, well, nobody's yelling at us for one thing. I went, oh, okay. I think it lends itself to the fact that the story is told through the eyes of a very young woman. And I think it was only helpful that so many women were attached to the production from the beginning. I think it was very clear to Marcia and to Lucy and to Heidi and myself and Michael that we were telling the stories through the eyes of a young woman and a young, powerless woman
Right.
at the time. And what it meant for her to find a voice and to be able to assert herself and to make a home and get, I want to say room of one's own, to get a garden, in this case, a garden of one's own, but very
Right.
similar to what that, what the idea of a room of one's own is. And so I think it all played into what the show was about. We also had Heidi, and when it came to the design of the show, so many people talk about it, the design, which won a Tony. Both Heidi and I had played with those paper theaters growing up.
Oh,
Those
really?
paper that you make a little theater and make the proscenium and all. We both had done that. So it was very much wanting to, again, put the story through that lens. So what does that mean for Broadway now? Well, we've made some progress. It's not nearly enough. There has been progress, but it's not, the equation is still way outbalanced. For all through the years since Secret Garden and since all my other shows, I was almost always the only woman in the room. Still.
Yeah.
So it, especially for directing, it's tough, I think, and I've said this before and people have criticized me for it. Women's work is still, to a large extent, being judged differently.
Yeah.
And I think it'll take a little bit more time and many more women having the opportunity to fail for it to equal out.
That's a very important point.
And to be able to fail. Men get so many opportunities, they can fail a few times, it's fine.
Right.
Women get so much fewer opportunities, so when they fail, it's a bigger deal.
Right.
And we're all going to fail. Not everything we're going to do is going to be wildly successful. And especially if you are courageous and you're trying something, you have a vision for something, it's not always going to work out. So women just need more opportunity. People of artists of color need more opportunity to fail, right, so they can succeed.
I think that is so important. When a man fails, it's that man's fault, right? And then if a woman director fails, it's the failure of all womankind.
Right.
And
right.
It's just so unfair.
It's so unfair. It's so unfair. When I think when I directed Sweeney, I was the third woman in the history of the Tonys to be nominated for directing a musical.
Wow.
Third in 40 years, I think. Well, you know.
That's crazy.
Crazy. It's
It's
crazy.
crazy.
There's certainly no dearth of talent. We have plenty of talent.
Sure.
There's plenty of talented women around. But I think we have to start in our educational institutions. I think I have our two first-year directors are women this year. I've had a great component of women. I go out of my way to try to find women candidates for the program. And
Sure.
I think that's very helpful too, for evening the curve a bit. Yeah.
Right. Well, as I'm head of a program too, and I think the responsibility that we have to train instructors is that, finding opportunities for women, opportunities for people of color.
Right.
Everyone has to do their own part, and I feel that very personally.
Absolutely.
I want to talk about new work for a second. So we talked a little bit about Secret Garden. So new work has been a real cornerstone of your career with shows like Secret Garden and Violet and Little Women, two of the shows that we worked together on. What is it about a new work that attracts you to it? And what does the role of a director play in the development of the new musical? And of course, that probably is different, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
It's different each show. The role, it depends on how far along the piece is when the director comes to it. Garden had been through a developmental process, so I came to it, even though we made huge changes in it, it still had a team of a composer and a lyricist who had already worked together on certain things. I was very early on in Violet. I remember Janine and Brian playing me a song. And the song was the first song they wrote together, which I believe is Lay Down Your Head. And it was beautiful, beautiful song. And I said, this is great, this is beautiful. And I then read this, and Janine said, read the short story, what do you think? They were both in the BMI workshop at the time, and I was moderating the librettists section of the BMI workshop.
Oh, interesting.
And so I read the short story by Doris Betts, and the entire story takes place on a bus.
Oh, interesting.
So I went back to Janine and I went, Janine, honey, the whole thing takes place on a bus. And in typical, if you know Janine, Janine fact, she went, yeah, I know, but that's your problem. And of course, then she and Brian, started to do what you normally do with when you are adapting something from. We were very fortunate. Doris Betts gave us a lot of leeway.
Good.
She was wonderful because we completely changed the end of the short story, and she was fine with that. Good. And they started to choose moments from the story that they felt were the most heightened and the most theatrical, and wrote to those moments first. And then started structuring the whole piece, which is the way I find when you're adapting things is the best way to work, is to go through the piece and let the emotional highlights come forward.
Did you counsel on that part of it, or did they do that on their own?
We all did it together. Did it together. They did all the writing. I didn't do any of the writing.
Sure.
But we talked that through all the time. We were very fortunate too to have a lot of supportive developmental work. We were supported by the new musicals at Lincoln Center, supported us, and we're supported by a workshop at Players Horizons as well before we did the production. So we had a lot of readings and a lot of workshops, and we're able to we also went to the O'Neill Festival.
Oh.
So we had a lot of very supportive situations where we could do an act, get feedback, work on it at the O'Neill Center, especially because we can keep working and do readings. So we were lucky. It had a very nice developmental period of time, and we got a lot of feedback from a lot of very smart people.
Did Andre Bishop and Ira Weitzman?
Yep, Ira very much was a part of the workshop at Lincoln Center. Yep.
Okay.
And Tim at the playwrights.
Okay.
Tim Sanford, yeah.
Go ahead.
Pardon me. And then we playwrights gave us a production, which was the exact, I thought, it was the old theater at the time. So it was a very small stage, but it had, I think, a very lovely first production. Yeah.
That was wonderful. What about Little Women? How'd you get onto that one?
Oh, goodness. Little Women was, it had a life that wasn't working out. Let me put it that way. I didn't know anything about the other people. It had a different set of writers,
Yeah.
and the producers wanted a fresh start with it. And they came to me with my agent, and I used to laugh. We'd go, well, if it's an adaptation of a classic and all the women wear long skirts, they're going to come to you. So I went, great. Anyway, I loved the book, so I was pleased to do it. And I read the script that they had, and I felt that it needed work. They knew it needed work, but I wanted to make sure that the writers understood that, or else I couldn't really come aboard. And they did, and they started working on it. And so we were able to do, again, we did some readings, and we were fortunate enough to be able to bring it to Broadway.
Right.
Yeah. It's a very, secret, between Secret Garden and Little Women, of course, they're both classics, right? Secret Garden, people remember less than Little Women. And we completely changed the end of Secret Garden. Nobody mentioned it at all until I got to Canada when we were touring the US and Canada. And a woman wrote a wonderful article about misremembering and how nobody had mentioned the fact that we completely changed the ending of Secret Garden in all these years. Because in the book, the garden goes to Cullen.
Oh.
Cullen gets the key to the garden.
You're
Well,
right.
how do you do that? I mean, there's no way on earth we're going to put this little child through all this and then give the garden to her cousin. No. But people sometimes misremember the way they want things to be. And so that was, again, we felt okay because we think everybody's going to think she got the garden, which is exactly what happened. But when it came to Little Women is so iconic. People can quote from the book.
Sure.
And that's a huge burden to know what to put on stage, what to leave out. Are we going to leave out someone's favorite moment? Yes, of course we are. Yes. Because we only have 2 hours. And that was very, very difficult to know what to dramatize, what theatrical, until we made the decision to keep it within a 3-4 year period of her life.
Right.
To just telescope it down and to choose what was the most important 3 or 4 years of Joe's life. Joe is your main character, which, by the way, you better know who your main character is. All of you out there who are writing musicals, do not start if you don't know who your main character is.
Yes. Define your protagonist.
Yes, exactly.
And put them through hell.
Because within that time, she goes to New York, she loses Beth, Laurie proposes. I mean, all the big major emotional moments happen within that time. So we felt we could telescope it down to that. And that's what we did, but it was very difficult to do. And I think there are still people who say, well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? I went, well, because it's about this.
Right.
And that's our decision to do that.
Well, it was an extraordinary thing to work on, at Duke University in North Carolina, and then the Broadway run. It was a real special part of my career.
It is. It was, because it's so beloved and because everybody has an opinion about it, it was very hard to put blinders on and know who you could listen to and who you had to shut out. Right. So you could keep going forward in what you had decided was going to be your storytelling arc. And that was the most difficult part. There was so much bombardment of ideas from the outside. Yeah.
It's true. That's a real challenge. I mean, just tying it back into what Sondheim had told you, which was the art of being a good listener, but then there's
Yeah.
an extra art to know who to listen to.
Exactly.
And it can't just be the people telling you the good things either.
Right.
That
Right.
can't be your filter. That's
No, I know. I know.
no.
Well, as I got older and smarter, which on Broadway, you have lots of producers. You
Sure.
have myriad of producers. It's gone are the days when they used to be this one way. But there usually is a line producer, the person who is sort of in charge of your production. And I tell them, look, I'm happy to listen, but I can't listen to 15 people.
Right.
If you will be the person to funnel the notes from all the producers so I can listen to you, I will listen to anything you have to say to me. But I cannot be, dragged to 15 different directions every time someone has a note. And so to the most part, they agree to that.
Right. Right. Some of them are even married to the composer.
Yes.
So I want to talk a little bit about casting for a moment before we wrap up this section of it. Our last session was with Tara Rubin, who was fantastic.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask, when you're working on a large scale Broadway musical, or even anytime, at what point of the casting process do you get involved? Is that way from the beginning, or do you get more hands-on later in the process? Like, how do you work with a casting director?
I work from the beginning.
Okay.
From the very, very beginning. And actually, it starts with my collaborators. And I say to my collaborators before we do anything, what's the most important thing for you about this character?
Interesting.
Do they have to be a great singer? Do they have to be a great actor? Do they have to be a great dancer? What is the single most important thing in this character's storytelling for you? And so I get to some sort of agreement about that. And then I say, okay, if you could cast anyone in the world, regardless of money, status, anybody in the world in this role, who would you cast? That helps me get an idea of where, especially with a new show, where everybody's mindset is and what they're thinking about. And then if I feel that, I don't understand that, I'll go, well, tell me why that person, what about that person intrigues you for the role? So I try to get as much of that information, and then I pass that information on to the casting director. I said, look.
Directly. No.
Absolutely, yeah.
Sorry, you were going to say, look.
No, I don't go to all the open calls, but I do go to the very next session once the open calls have happened. Yeah.
Can I ask you?
I'll give a list of people too that I want to see.
Well, yeah. Can you give an example of that? Like maybe Violet? Like, what did Janine and Brian say about the character of Violet that they said it has to be X, a great singer, a great actor, and who did they see as the person they wanted?
I have no memory of this. Okay. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. Or pick another show that you do remember.
I do know they both felt, what I do remember is they felt that there had to be a kind of unsophisticated, visceral earthiness about the character.
Sure.
They couldn't be, right, and very, and they said, sometimes people ask, do they should be pretty, not pretty? They said, we don't care as long as she doesn't think she's pretty.
Interesting.
Important thing is that you can't think she's pretty, right? None of us, I knew Lauren Ward because I had worked with her on a show before, but nobody else knew her. And Lauren is a country girl.
Sure.
So she came in and all her country girl stuff was there. Yeah. So I do remember that discussion. I don't know, I can't remember of the other qualities, but I'm sure they mentioned, people that we could connect to.
All right. What about someone like Archie Craven?
Oh, yeah. They the person that they talked about a lot, now this, nobody of your students can know who Raymond Massey is. Anybody know who Raymond Massey is? Right. Okay. The feel of that, because nobody wanted him to be a villain, quote.
Right.
So somebody who was kind of good looking, self-possessed, intelligent, spoke well, everything, and then the dark side just kind of seeped out every now and then, right? So I know that was a person that was mentioned, yeah.
Right. What about Laurie in Little Women?
Laurie and Little Women. Let me think. I don't remember.
Okay. Any others that you remember from Little Women or otherwise?
Well, what was interesting about Joe was that when we first discussed it, there was, well, someone like Sutton Foster, you know, it's like Sutton Foster. Well, because if you think of Sutton just abstractly, just her physicality, and you read what was written about what was written in the book, it's exactly what Sutton is. The way she uses her limb, especially when Sutton is not performing, when she's just relaxed, when she's just Sutton.
Right.
Those long legs, those long arms, the kind of lack of artifice, the completely honest person that she is. So that, you know, then of course you said, well, what about Sutton Foster? You know, someone like Sutton Foster. What about Sutton Foster? We actually waited a year for Sutton to be available. So once we made that decision that this was it, this was the right thing to go, and Sutton agreed. And Sutton was very canny too, because I didn't know her, and I met her first at lunch, and she said to me, I want to audition for you. And I said, Sutton, we're offering you. She says, no, I want to audition for you.
Interesting.
I want you to be sure that I'm the person that you want for this role.
That sounds like her.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's so generous and
so generous. She was the most generous. I would tease, I don't know if you remember this, because it happened when we were at Duke, because we were trying to get the scenery on and off stage, and things would end up on the floor and everything like that. And Sutton would always pick up whatever fell, put it on a piece of scenery that was moving, and it would go. Anybody dropped anything, they never picked it up. Sutton picked it up. So at one point, while I was giving notes, I pointed to her, the rest of the cast. I said, you see that woman there? Is she your servant? And they all went, what? I went, if you drop it, you pick it up.
Yeah, that sounds
That's
like
not in her job description.
Yeah. That's so interesting.
It became so hilarious that literally the stage would be lit and Sutton would be making things up and putting on scenery that would be moving. Anyway, yeah,
that's
I think
amazing.
It is amazing, but I think it's very important when you're collaborating on a new piece. The thing about doing something that's not a revival is that nobody really knows for sure, right? Nobody knows for sure. They think they know, but we don't really know. If you're doing Sweeney Todd, there are lots of things you know for sure. Thank you, Hal Prince. You know, the original director on a show does a lot of the work for you. He's done a great deal of it for you. And so there are things you know. When you're doing a new show, it's all experimental. It's all, let's try this, let's try that. Maybe this will work. Oh, maybe that's not where that song goes. Maybe the song really goes here. So, you know, the old saying that musicals are not written, they're rewritten is so true.
Right.
And that one of the things I love about working on a new show is making something that has never happened happen. You know, telling a story that has never been told this way. How is that going to illuminate this story? In what ways will be different? What will someone think about Little Women that they didn't think about before?
Right. Well, there's a lot of people listening here that are very interested in the casting part. And I just wanted to point something out, what you said there, that how you describe these characters and how the authors describe the characters and how you're approaching your relationship with the casting director has to do way more with the essence of a person and what they bring into a room than it matters to how high they belt or the color of their hair or the kind of shoes that they have on. You know, I think that the key to auditioning and being successful is understanding the essence of people rather than a note.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, there's there's a quality, an emotional quality that everybody has. Everybody is vulnerable in a different way. You can't just say, I want a vulnerable person. We're all vulnerable, but we're vulnerable differently. And if you're casting a Violet, she needs to be vulnerable on her sleeves. She needs to wear her heart on her sleeves, not just here. She needs to be so raw emotionally, be able to connect that way. And so that's important that the casting director know that, that they bring in people who are able to access that part of themselves, right?
That's amazing. There's so many great things that we discussed. We could go on and on, but I'm going to move on to the pivot questionnaire, if we don't mind, if that's okay.
Sure.
All right. So just for everybody out there, the pivot questionnaire, these 10 questions come from a French interview series called Bouillon de Culture, hosted by Bernard Pivot. But they're better known as the questions that James Lipton asked every guest at the end of his Inside the Actors Studio television show. I'm a big fan of Jim Lipton, and I'm doing these questions in homage to him, who just recently passed away. So we lost a great. So question number one, Susan H. Schulman, is what is your favorite word?
Oh, goodness. You know, for some reason, I like M words.
Okay.
So, myriad. I love the word myriad. I love the way it feels in your mouth. And miasma. I just like, they're musical in ways. I think my favorite words are musical words, and I find I use the word myriad probably more than I should.
No, I love that because they're both collaborative words. They are words that are open to a lot of different ideas.
Indeed. Yeah,
I like
indeed.
that. So the second question is, what is your least favorite word?
Oh, no.
How do you avoid saying it?
I don't like when people say it to me at
There
all.
you go. Yes.
So I try not to say it to them. I try to say, let me think about that, which is something I picked up in dealing with producers.
Sure.
Instead of saying no, well, let me think about that. They realize I'm saying no after a while, but it's nicer. And sometimes you do actually think about it. I mean, yeah, I think the problem with no is it's a very, look, every 2-year-old learns it really quickly.
Sure.
As a way of cutting things off. And that's what I feel about the word. It just cuts off discussion.
Right.
And I think people are too, some people, not everybody, it's a word that just comes too quickly. And I think just need to say, let me think about it. I don't know, maybe.
I like it. So number 3 is, what turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Creatively, well, certainly melody. Beautiful melody moves me. When it comes to stories, I move by stories. I started as a teenager realizing that most books were written by men. And a great librarian said to me, there are great books written by women. And she started to give me all those books written by women. And I began to realize that moved me was stories of women, young women meeting challenges in the world and succeeding. So obviously, if you look at my body of work,
I was going to say, your memoir will be something that turns
clear.
on someone else. I like it.
But even in doing Sweeney Todd, one of the things that I remember talking about was how Mrs. Lovett was striving for a better life. She was, what she did for love, not for money, because if she wanted the money, she could have sold his silver razors years ago.
Sure.
So she's doing it for love and for a better life and to get beyond her circumstances and making her a more empathetic character for women at that time as well, right? So I think these are things that move me, obviously. What was the rest of the question?
You got it. That's all good.
Good. All right.
So the counterpoint to that question is number 4. What turns you off?
Oh, wow. Where should I begin? You know, aside from war and famine, cruelty,
Yeah.
Lack of civility, violence. I almost cannot tolerate watching violence. I have no tolerance for it. On screen, on stage. Gratuitous, of course.
Right.
When it's gratuitous. I find the lack of civility to be basically meaning lack of respect. And if someone is not civil to me, they don't respect me. And if I'm not civil to someone, I'm not respecting them or their point of view, what they have to say. And I think today, too often, we find if we disagree with somebody, it means you don't care about them. I had a huge disagreement with someone I care about a lot. And I remember saying to them, I'm never going to agree with you on this point. It's never going to happen. I disagree with you, but I still love you.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very hard for her to understand that, how I could so vehemently disagree with something, but still love her. And I think we sometimes confuse this, that we have to agree with everything, that in order to love somebody or care or respect them. It's not true. I mean, when is that really ever going to happen?
Right. Not everything's going to line up.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. But I find that lack of civility goes along with my not liking the word no. I think it's all kind of tied in together. Right? Is something that we need to do a better job of training our young people to be civil and to be good listeners.
Mm-hmm. I agree. All right, so number 5 is, what is your favorite curse word?
You're going to laugh at me for that. Drats.
That doesn't sound like someone from Brooklyn.
Well, because I had a great imagination and I always loved the old timey things. And
Sure.
I go to the movies and someone would say drats. And I thought that was great. And because I don't like to curse, I do, but I don't like cursing, but that I find that drats works very well.
Yeah, that's good. Well, it's very civil. So you're very consistent. I love this. Number 6 is, what sound or noise do you love?
Oh, this one is really easy because aside from music, which I think we talked about, I love the sound of the ocean.
Mm.
You know, I was born and brought up in Brooklyn, and people forget that Brooklyn's actually on the Atlantic Ocean.
Yes,
Because people would sometimes laugh. They go, "What ocean?" I go, "Yeah, Coney Island. You know, Coney Island. It's the Atlantic Ocean." And we would just take the subway to Coney Island all the time and walk the beaches. And so that the sound of the ocean has always been. And when I was at Hofstra, we were on Long Island. We were very near Jones Beach, and we would often drive out to Jones Beach and just walk at night. Or just as the sun was setting, walk the beach at night, which was so beautiful. Now I rent a house sometimes out on Fire Island, and I love it when it's misty, and I just walk the beach and hear the waves, and I find that very restorative. You know, the waves keep coming; they don't just stop; they keep coming. So.
It's true. I love the scene in Little Women that takes place at the seashore. That's one of my favorite songs. Very meaningful to me.
Yes.
So number 7 is the counterpart to that question, which is, what sound or noise do you hate?
I hate people yelling. You know, and I don't like people, well, obviously I don't like people yelling at me, but I don't even like people yelling at other people. And I don't like people yelling from the stage either. God, I just remembered this. I was walking down 42nd Street once, and this man, it was a woman walking with a young child, and this man was screaming at her. Oh. They were obviously a couple. He was screaming at her, and I have no idea what she did. It doesn't matter. He was screaming at her, and it affected me so physically that I actually didn't even know what possessed me. I went up to him and I said, "Stop that. Stop right now. You stop yelling at her."
Wow.
Now. And he turned to me and looked at me like I was a crazy lady. And I said, "You can't do that." And then I realized after I said that what I was saying, and I went, it's illegal. I said, it's illegal. You're disturbing the peace. You can't do that in New York City.
Where did you pull that?
I have no idea.
And what was his response?
It was like my New York street kid came out, and you know what I mean? He was flabbergasted. He was flabbergasted. And I could see him say, "Mind your own business." I could see him say, and he said to me, he was about to say, "Mind your own business." And I went, "Don't tell me to mind my own business because you've made it my business."
Wow. I love that. You're my hero.
And then I said, I just went on because, and there was a policewoman at the end of the street, and 42nd Street, I said, "You see that policeman, that police person?" I don't even know what I said. I said, "But if you keep yelling, I'm going to report you to her." And
wow.
Well, he stopped yelling. But I just hate, I mean, the yelling was obviously a horrible abuse of this woman, an emotional abuse of this woman and this little child. And I just couldn't bear it. I absolutely couldn't bear it. And I actually stopped and talked to the policewoman. I told her, she thought it was hilarious. And she said, "Well, you know what?" She said, "You're not totally wrong."
Oh, really?
If he had kept it up, he would have been disturbing the peace. And if that happened as they're walking, she could have said something to him.
Very good.
There you go.
All right. I love that.
So we hate yelling.
Oh, good. So Mammoth is not your thing?
No. Well, I've seen Mammoth without people yelling.
Okay.
Been very controlled.
Okay.
And it's only been yelling when you absolutely needed to. So.
Okay.
And in Mammoth where everybody yells all the time. And, yeah.
That's most have been my experience. All right. So here's number 8, which is, what profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Okay. Would I like to attempt?
Yes.
Oh, well, I'm really not fit for anything else, right? So.
Okay. That can be your answer if you like.
my siblings are quite a bit older than me. They're both gone now, but they were quite a bit older than me. And they used to say that all the time. "Well, you're not fit for anything else." But it was sweet. It was very loving. But there was a time in my life when I thought being a nun would be great fun because of the costumes and the props and the set.
Right.
It was the old days when nuns wore the big habits and the dragon. I had a lot of Catholic friends growing up in Brooklyn. And so I went to church all the time with them. And I thought, look at this set, and look at these, props and everything. It was very theatrical. I got over that really soon when I realized what nun's life really was like. But interestingly, when I did The Sound of Music on Broadway, we all went up to visit the convent at Regina Laudis in Bethlehem, Connecticut, which is a cloistered order of nuns that still wear the full drag, and they sing the service.
Wow. So
we were able to stay overnight. And if I had to join a convent, that would be a convent I would join. It's excellent. Truly incredible. And there are incredible women who work there.
Oh, yeah.
So, anyway, but that was, I thought maybe I'd be an archaeologist. I had interest in archaeology and history and all that, but that was never very serious. I always knew somehow, somewhere, thought I would be a dancer, I'd be a ballet dancer, and that didn't work out because I wasn't talented. And then I thought I'd be an actor, and that just sort of evolved.
Yeah.
So
that's good. I'm glad you found your place here.
Thank you.
Number 9 is the counterpart to that, which is, what profession would you like not to do?
Oh, I could never be a surgeon. I could never be a surgeon. I don't know how a human being can do that and be so calm about it. I had one of my siblings had a major operation, and I was with her as the surgeon described what he was going to do. And I'm not a faint of heart, so it's not that the blood or anything like that would bother me. I just couldn't believe that he could do that and not be a nervous wreck.
Right.
And he was so calm and so confident. And he said, yeah, and so we're going to do this. We're going to remove half of that, and we'll do that, and it'll be great at the end. I went, okay. Wow. Okay. Or you talk to a brain surgeon or someone who does open heart surgery. I don't know how they do it. Mm-hmm. They literally have this person's life in their hands, and I think they're magical people.
Right. Well, we all own a debt of gratitude to all the medical workers that are out there now.
Absolutely. Nice. It's amazing what they do for us.
That is true.
And sacrifices they make.
Right. The 10th question of the Puville questionnaire is, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Oh dear. This is from a heathen, you ask this question.
That's why I say if heaven exists.
Okay.
That's a qualifier.
All right. Well done, kid.
I love that. That is great. Well, fantastic. I appreciate your talk here. And we have some, if you don't mind, we have some questions and answers here for you from the people. Here we go. This is from Jeremy Galotza. Hi, Jeremy.
Hi, Jeremy.
He says, hi, Susan. I'm an aspiring director at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Hey, IUP, represent. But I've always been a performer, and I've only directed a play once before. How does one practically work up to being a director? And what was your journey like working up to where you are now?
You have to direct. Oh. You have to direct. It's like anything else. You have to do it. It's muscles. Get those muscles going. Get people together. Get friends together. Find a piece to show that you like, or scenes that you like. Are you studying directing now? Is he
I don't think he can answer you.
Oh, okay. Anyway, and if you can study it, if you can make yourself available in situations where you have great mentors or teachers, also see as much theater as you can. I learned so much from just watching theater, and if you just go see as much theater. I know it's terribly expensive in New York, but there's theater everywhere, and you go and be critical. Why is it working? Just, oh, I love that. No, why did you love it? What worked about it? What didn't work about it? Why did you not like it? What about it didn't you like? What didn't you understand? Why do you think you didn't understand that part of the story? If you start engaging that way and warming up your critical muscles when you watch theater, you'll begin to understand what a director does. That's
great. Thank you for that. We got another answer here from Grace Howell. Hi, Grace. Susan, you seem to have mastered the balance between remaining humble, yet simultaneously maintaining confidence beautifully. Can you talk a bit about your journey getting to this place? Any tips you have for young women in this industry attempting to strike the same balance?
Well, I was born in Brooklyn, in Crown Heights. I am very humble. I come from very humble beginnings. As fortunate as I was to have parents who were encouraging and had creative leanings, just don't let them talk you out of it. That's all. Just keep going. Don't let anyone talk you out of it. When I was young, and my friends and I in Brooklyn, at that time, kids traveled all over the subways by themselves. And we went into New York every Saturday. We were all theater nerds, maybe 12 years old. And we waited outside the stage doors between the matinee and the evening performance, hoping that somebody would let us in to talk to us. And one day, the stage doorman would say, what do you kids want? We go, we want to talk to so-and-so. Sometimes they would actually do it in those days. And once Anne Bancroft, and I can't remember the show that she was in, but the doorman said, Miss Bancroft will see you. There were four of us. We went in to see her in her dressing room. I remember she was eating a pastrami sandwich and she was wearing a Chinese robe.
Wow.
And she was incredible. And she said, "Hey kids, what are you doing here? Did you see?" We had seen the matinee of that show. That's just what went on in my mind. Anyway, and she said, "So what do you want to do? What do you want to be?" And I want to be a writer. My friend's writer, actor. And she came to me and she said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to be a director." And she stopped and she sighed and she said, "I want to tell you two things, Susan. Get an education and do not let anyone talk you out of it."
I love that question.
And you know
I
what?
love that.
She was right, because people tried to talk me out of it my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
People would say to me things like, "There are no female directors in commercial theater," or "Why don't you just stick to acting?" Or "You don't want to do a big musical. You're a little girl. They're not going to want to hire a little girl to do a big musical." Things like that. I mean, they actually would say things like that. And I would just persevere and go, "Sorry, that's what I want to do." And I did get my first job directing in New York by actually sitting outside the producer's office for days on end until he would see me.
Wow.
That was Equity Library Theater in New York. Finally said, "You're still here?" I went, "Yep." He said, "Okay, come on in, let's talk." So
That's amazing. That's a great, I love that story. That's amazing. This next question is from Daniela Snyder's block.
hi, Danielle.
Did you have a hard time convincing your parents that theater was an acceptable career?
The only time it was a little difficult was when I was going into university and they wanted me not to major in theater because they were afraid I wouldn't be able to make a living. But my older siblings, who were very, very supportive, said, "Why are you setting her up for failure?" I remember that. She's not going to fail. She's going to major in theater, and that's where she's going to make her living. If you tell her she's not going to make her living in theater now, what's the point? So I was very fortunate that way. What I had a harder time convincing them was letting me travel into New York every day to go to performing arts by myself.
Mm.
That was just their concern.
Right.
But once I talked to them, my father became very interested once I started working, very interested in theater, but he was never convinced that I was making a living. And so, because I wasn't working all the time.
Right.
So, he didn't get it. And so when I would visit them in Brooklyn, and before I would leave, my father would always put a $20 bill in my pocket, even when I was making more money than he was. And at first I wanted to give it back. And then I realized, no, that's his way of giving to me and still
Right.
making sure that I was okay.
That's great. That's great. I have a question from someone who's interested in writing musicals. This is Palladino Keys, and he says, he or she, I don't know if this is, sorry, I don't know. But this is on adaptation from existing material, especially books. At what point in the creative process should we contact the original author or their estate? Should a playwright or composer have material for songs and libretto to offer before approaching them, or should we contact them before beginning?
It depends on how disappointed you want to be.
There it is.
There are lots of pieces that are in public domain, and first do that first. Make sure it's not in public domain. I would contact them before anything, before you start, because it's going to be heartbreaking if you write half a dozen songs and you have a first act and they say no. Right. Forget it. They may ask to see work that you've done before. They may say, "Well, have you written songs before? Have you written a play before?" They may ask that. It's not that difficult to get the rights, especially to a piece that has not ever been adapted for the stage. It's very complicated when something has already been adapted once before or has been adapted as a film. It becomes, there's all sorts of people you have to go through because film production often owns the stage rights, but sometimes they don't, and sometimes they don't know if they do. I've been trying to get the rights for something for about 5 years now, and I can't even get, and it had been made into a major motion picture. It's never been adapted for the stage. I can't even get the people who made the major motion picture to tell me whether they own the stage rights, because they don't know.
Mm.
And so they're going through all this archival material to try to find out who actually has the live stage rights. So that's what I mean, but it depends on how, how strong you are and how much you can tolerate disappointment. I would get it right away.
Right. Yeah.
And it's not that expensive when it's just, you just want to get the rights just to try.
Right.
Just to try. Let me just try to write a musical based on this.
Can you, you're talking about getting an option for something. Can you just describe that for, I don't know if people exactly know what that is.
Oh, well, you'd have to contact, it's interesting. I go directly to the author. Mm-hmm. People go to agents, they go to other, publishers. I go directly to the author. Sure. Very often, the publisher, the agents they're prone to say no, because they don't know who you are. Right. Sometimes if you have a connection to the author through somebody, I go straight to them. I find I get a much more positive response and a faster response. Sure.
Yeah, that's very true. All right, so we're just about at time here. So I got one more question here for you. Okay, this is from Kaylin Good. Is there a dream show that you've always wanted to direct but haven't gotten the chance to?
No.
All your dreams have come true.
I've been so fortunate. I've done so many Sondheim shows. All of them have been my dream, Merrily was always a big dream of mine, and I got a chance to do it. And for Merrily, Stephen Sondheim was there, and so was George Firth, because they were working on the show. They were doing some restructuring and rewriting, so I got a chance to actually work with both of them on that before we did it. So Merrily was always a show I felt very emotionally connected to. I honestly say that there is not one musical that exists now that I feel, there are plenty I haven't done that I would love to do. Sure. But,
So what's next? What do you have? I mean, nothing right now. But
very interestingly, in a complete circle, before this horrible pandemic descended on us, I was scheduled to go to Australia and do the 25th anniversary production of Secret Garden at Opera Australia.
Really?
The opera.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was being produced by the man, John Frost, who originally produced it in Australia. And I was so looking forward to doing that. We did all the pre-production on it, set, costumes, even the sound designer and I had worked. Show was completely cast. In an amazing cast. And it was supposed to go into rehearsal June 15th. Well, that's not happening. But that was the very next thing on my agenda, was to do that. And I was working with Heidi again on the set, and it was wonderful to reimagine and revisit that 30 years later, almost, sure. Yeah. Right? And also to, again, look at it through a modern lens. How do people see these things now? How do people see this moment now? How would this moment play in 2021? Different than it played in, 91, right?
Well, certainly the aspect of a mysterious disease coming and killing someone's parents is going to be very poignant.
Unfortunately, is very poignant. And the same thing that with cholera, when cholera wiped out so many people, nobody knew how it was transmitted. Right. And so it kept getting worse because no one realized it was waterborne, that it was transmitted through the water. And so they kept drinking water, because one of the things cholera does is dehydrate you. So it kept making it worse and exacerbated itself.
Right.
Of course, at the time that we were putting this together, this hadn't happened, even for this revival. But it was so interesting because I felt that even with the issues of consent and Me Too and all of this, that suddenly Mary Lennox's story took on a whole new dimension. And I couldn't wait to do it again. I was so excited to be doing it again. And we may still be able to once this subsides, God willing, and we're all, we find a treatment and a cure.
Right. Well, I can't thank you enough for stepping in today and joining us for this hour. I hope everyone has enjoyed themselves. So everyone give silent applause for Susan H. Schulman for being with us today. The SDSU Studio Series returns on Wednesday, April 8th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time with actress Laura Osnes, followed by Broadway music director Mary Mitchell Campbell on Friday. The series continues on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at the same time until May 6th. Please see our website for details, sdsustudioseries.wordpress.com. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it.
Bye.